Death al Dente is not a good film. I'm starting to realise the writers of the Gourmet Detective Mysteries only have one idea, and they're trying to do the same story over and over again, and I am really glad there are only 2 films left in this series. If there were more, I might not have continued with them, but I'm going to power through. I will go into each of the other 2 with an open mind and hope for the best, but based on Death al Dente and the previous film, I can probably predict exactly what's going to happen in the next 2. This one was released in 2016. It's directed by Terry Ingram, and of course it stars Dylan Neal as Henry and Brooke Burns as Maggie. And for the most part, it's boring. It's not necessarily a badly written narrative, and on its own, the ending is okay. But, well, I will tell you more about that with a spoiler warning, but it's one of the reasons that make me just absolutely laugh at the lack of effort from the writers. It really is so bad. It is laughable. But other than that, the narrative is okay. Boring, but fine. But Henry is the most obnoxious character ever. I actually actively hate him. I didn't hate him in the previous film. I didn't like him, but I didn't hate him. But by now, I can strongly say he is a terribly written character with no positive qualities, really. He is absolutely horrendous. This film obviously focuses on the restaurant industry. I'm starting to realise as well that not just the bad writing and the bad characters, but also they probably ended this series very early because Henry doesn't have anything else to offer. Unlike other Hallmark sleuths who have a keen interest in crime, Henry basically knows about food and that's it. He doesn't have anything else to offer, at least with what we've seen, apart from his giant ego. And I can see why the series didn't last. This one, as I said, focuses on another crime surrounding restaurants and things. I will say things escalate pretty steadily. It starts off as a pretty bad crime and then becomes a much more serious crime. And I don't want to give away too much, but I will say the pacing of the crime was done well. Credit where it's due, that bit was okay. The suspects are boring, but I didn't work it out, so it wasn't completely obvious. Again, credit where it's due, but that's about as far as the credit goes. Well, Maggie. Actually, I quite like Maggie as a character. I'm really warming to her. I think she's a pretty decent character, but unfortunately, as I said, Henry is so impossibly unlikable that it's hard to follow their journey together because I hate him. He is so big-headed. He thinks he is a detective. He doesn't realise he's just a consultant. Whenever he's talking to people, he says, we this and we that. And at one point he said, and I quote, "Why don't I lead the interview?" Why not? Well, because you're just a consultant. You're not a detective. Get your head out of your backside. He is a horrendously big-headed character. I don't mind him being big-headed when it comes to his food. If he wants to have an ego with his cooking, that's fine. I'm okay with that. I actually quite admire that. He's passionate about his work. He cares about his craft. That's pretty cool. But to think that he is a detective and to be acting like a detective, I hate him. I really passionately hate him. And actually, Maggie's not best pleased with him at one point either. I'll talk about that in a moment with a spoiler warning, and then I'll discuss why the ending is just laughably horrendous. On its own, not so bad, but as part of the bigger picture, the writers can't do more than one thing, apparently. It's not a good film. The narrative is okay. It's not interesting, it's not suspenseful. The pacing is fine, but there's no real suspense. It isn't completely obvious, so that is a good thing, because there's obviously nothing worse than when a mystery is so obvious you work it out immediately. So there are some good things, but I wouldn't say it's a good narrative. Maggie is quite a likeable character. Henry is one of the worst characters I've ever had to suffer through, and unless he has a massive change of personality for the next 2 films, I'm kind of dreading it. I know I don't have to watch them, but I need that sense of completion because there are only 2 more. I need to get to the end, otherwise I will constantly be thinking, I should watch it, I should watch it. I'm just going to get them over and done with. As I said, I will go in with an open mind, as I did with this one. The previous film was not very good. It wasn't as bad as this one. It wasn't very good, though. I went in with this one, hoping for something decent, and the story was dull, and Henry is obnoxious. So I don't recommend it at all, and that's very, very rare for a Hallmark mystery film. So a couple of spoilers from now. I'm not going to spoil who was responsible for the crime, but I do want to spoil well, I don't want to spoil, but I will spoil a couple of things. And one, and I could have hugged Maggie. I could have hugged her and squeezed her when she said to Henry, "You're sharing evidence with suspects." Thank you for proving my point, Maggie. Henry revealed that he, just casually in conversation, he happened to mention that he showed a suspect something that's integral to part of the narrative. And Maggie was like, "You showed this to the suspect?" And I just thought, I love you. Thank you for pointing that out, because he is incompetent. He doesn't know what he is doing. And that's fine. He's a chef. But he's acting like he's running the show. And he's just horrendous. The other thing that is so laughable, I actually genuinely laughed. Yet again, for the third film in a row, Maggie is held at gunpoint by the suspect. On this occasion, credit where it's due, nobody was tied up. In the previous two films, at least one of them was tied up by the suspect. At this point, we can call him the culprit. In this one, nobody was tied up, so well done to the writers for slightly breaking the mould. But the culprit did, once again, have them at gunpoint, and then somebody swooped in at the 11th hour and saved the day. There are more ways to end a mystery film than holding people at gunpoint. Get a grip. Get a creative bone. Come on. There are so many ways. I have seen many Hallmark mysteries by this point. And I mentioned this in the previous film review, that in none of the other series that I've watched, none of them have had two endings that are even that remotely similar. And yet here we have three back to back. It's laughably bad. It is amateur. It is juvenile. It is pathetic. And I don't understand how any writer could be proud of creating three stories with three near identical endings. I'd be ashamed. So it's terrible. It's really terrible. The film is boring. Henry is obnoxious. The ending is hysterically bad. On its own, it's not bad. If this was the first one that I'd ever seen, I'd think, okay, that's a pretty reasonable way to end the film. But when you're a writer for a series, and your decision is to end them all in the same way, you shouldn't be employed to write the endings of those films, because that's absolutely diabolical. It's terrible. Not a good film. Do not recommend it at all. Not really looking forward to the next one.